how the Vanderbilts organized daily life in Newport. Along the rocky coastline of Rhode Island, where the Atlantic Ocean meets ancient cliffs worn smooth by centuries of crashing waves, there stands a collection of extraordinary buildings. These structures, built during a brief moment in American history, tell the story of how some of the wealthiest families in the world chose to spend their summer months. Among these families, none left a more lasting mark on Newport than the Vanderbilts, whose presence transformed a quiet seaside town into the undisputed capital of American high society. The Vanderbilt family arrived in Newport during the final decades of the 19th century, bringing with them a fortune built on steamships and railroads. Cornelius Vanderbilt, known as the Commodore, had established the family's wealth through shrewd business dealings. By the time his descendants turned their attention to Newport, the family name had become synonymous with American industrial might and unprecedented wealth. Newport itself had a long history before the Vanderbilts discovered its charms. The town had served as a colonial trading port and later as a modest summer retreat. What drew people to Newport was simple: the cooling ocean breezes that swept across the island, making summer temperatures notably more bearable than those in New York, Boston, or Providence. In an age before air conditioning, this natural climate control represented genuine luxury. The transformation of Newport from modest summer homes into a showcase of American wealth began gradually. Early residents built wooden houses, calling them cottages in a deliberate understatement that persisted even as structures became increasingly grand. The term cottage, when applied to a 70-room marble mansion, reveals much about the peculiar language of Gilded Age wealth. Cornelius Vanderbilt II, grandson of the Commodore, became the most prominent Vanderbilt presence in Newport. He had worked his way up through the family railroad business, eventually becoming chairman and president of the New York Central Railroad system. His position brought not only enormous wealth, but also significant responsibilities. During the week, he remained in New York, attending to business matters that required constant attention. But for the summer months, he and his wife Alice sought the cooler climate and social opportunities of Newport. The Vanderbilts' decision to build in Newport reflected broader changes in American society during the 1880s and 1890s. The nation's industrial expansion had created fortunes of a size previously unknown in America. Without federal income tax, which would not arrive until 1913, these fortunes remained largely intact, available to be spent on whatever their owners desired. For many wealthy families, the answer to what they desired was social standing, recognition, and the visible display of their success. Alice Gwynne Vanderbilt, wife of Cornelius II, understood the importance of Newport to the family's social position. She had grown up in Cincinnati, part of a respected family, but not one of great wealth. Her marriage to Cornelius Vanderbilt elevated her into the highest circles of American society, and she took seriously the responsibilities that came with that position. Newport offered her a stage on which to demonstrate the family's refinement, taste, and cultural sophistication. The Vanderbilts were not alone in Newport, of course. By the 1890s, Bellevue Avenue had become lined with magnificent summer homes. The Astors, Ulrichs, Berwins, and other prominent families all maintained properties there. The avenue itself ran along the highest ridge of the island, offering both the best ocean breezes and the most prestigious addresses. Gas-fired street lamps illuminated the road, and the constant parade of carriages created a daily spectacle of wealth and fashion. Competition among these families drove much of the building boom. When one family constructed a particularly impressive mansion, others felt compelled to match or exceed it. This competitive spirit shaped both the physical landscape of Newport and the social rhythms that governed daily life there. The Vanderbilt family's approach to Newport differed somewhat from that of other wealthy families. While they certainly participated in the social competition and spent freely on their properties, they also maintained a certain dignity and reserve. Cornelius II in particular was known for being less flamboyant than some of his peers. He focused on business and family, leaving much of the social maneuvering to his wife while he attended to his railroad empire. The family's children grew up dividing their time between New York and Newport, learning from an early age the different expectations and behaviors appropriate to each setting. Gertrude, Alfred, Cornelius III, Gladys, and Reginald all became familiar with Newport's rhythms. They learned to dress appropriately for different times of day, to participate in the expected social activities, and to navigate the complex web of relationships that defined Newport society. Newport during the Gilded Age operated according to an unwritten but well-understood set of rules. The social season typically ran from June through early September, with families arriving in stages and departing in stages. The peak of the season came in July and August, when the most important balls and dinners took place. During these months, Newport became the center of American high society, the place where reputations were made or destroyed, where marriages were arranged, and where the pecking order of American wealth was constantly negotiated and renegotiated. The physical arrangement of Newport facilitated this social world. The mansions along Bellevue Avenue and Ochre Point were close enough for families to visit easily, yet each estate maintained sufficient land for privacy. The Cliff Walk, a public path along the ocean behind many great houses, allowed ordinary citizens to glimpse the mansions, while the wealthy enjoyed sea views. The transformation that the Vanderbilts and their peers brought to Newport was not merely architectural. They changed the economic base of the town, creating new opportunities for local merchants, servants, craftspeople, and service providers. During the summer season, the population of Newport swelled significantly. Servants traveled from New York with their employers. Additional local staff were hired. Shops along Bellevue Avenue catered specifically to the summer residents, offering dressmaking, hairstyling, catering, and various other services that the wealthy required. As the 1890s progressed, Newport consolidated its position as America's premier summer resort. The old money families from Boston and New York who had long dominated American society found themselves joined and sometimes challenged by newly wealthy industrialists like the Vanderbilts. This mixing created social tensions, but it also made Newport an exciting and dynamic place, where fortunes could buy entry into circles that had previously been closed. The Vanderbilt family's commitment to Newport reached its fullest expression in the construction of the Breakers, a mansion so grand that it would become the defining symbol of Gilded Age excess and ambition. But before examining that remarkable structure, it is worth considering the broader context in which it was built. The Breakers was not simply a house, it was a statement about the Vanderbilt family's place in American society, a physical embodiment of their wealth and their aspirations. The architecture of daily life. The Breakers. In November 1892, fire swept through the original wooden mansion that Cornelius Vanderbilt II had purchased on Ochre Point Avenue. The building, which the family had owned since 1885, was destroyed. Rather than simply rebuilding what had been lost, Cornelius and Alice decided to create something entirely new, something that would stand as one of the greatest private residences in America. For this ambitious project, they turned to Richard Morris Hunt, one of the most distinguished architects of the era. His design drew inspiration from 16th-century palaces of Genoa and Turin, creating an Italian Renaissance Revival-style palazzo. The construction took place between 1893 and 1895. Cornelius insisted the building be fireproof, a requirement that shaped many design aspects. The structure was built of masonry and steel trusses, with wooden components minimized. Even the boiler was located underground beneath the front lawn, separated from the main house to reduce fire risk. The finished mansion covered approximately 1 acre of the 14-acre estate. With 70 rooms spread across 5 floors, the building contained approximately 62,000 square feet of living space within a total gross area of 138,000 square feet. The scale was extraordinary, yet the design maintained a certain elegance and proportion that prevented it from feeling merely overwhelming. Approaching the Breakers from Ochre Point Avenue, visitors encountered elaborate wrought iron gates, 30 feet high, set within a 12-foot-high fence of limestone and iron that enclosed the property on all sides except the ocean side. The gates themselves were works of art, featuring Baroque designs that announced the grandeur waiting beyond. The driveway curved through carefully maintained grounds before reaching the main entrance. The entrance made an immediate impression. Massive oak doors opened into the Great Hall, a space that soared 50 feet upward, with a coffered ceiling decorated in gold leaf. The walls featured alabaster and marble, while the floor displayed intricate mosaic work depicting mythological scenes. This entrance was designed to awe visitors and establish the magnificence of everything that would follow. Off the Great Hall, various rooms radiated outward, each designed for specific purposes and times of day. To the left, visitors would find the morning room, where Alice Vanderbilt and her female guests gathered during the earlier hours. This room featured wall panels made from platinum, one of the most expensive materials available. The choice of platinum over the more traditional gold reflected a deliberate desire to create something unique, something that went beyond mere opulence to achieve genuine rarity. The music room occupied a particularly important place in the house's social geography. This large chamber, with its magnificent pipe organ hidden behind ornate wooden panels, served as the setting for recitals, dances, and other entertainments. 16th-century Flemish tapestries hung on the walls, while baccarat crystal chandeliers provided illumination. The room's acoustics had been carefully planned, allowing music to fill the space without excessive echo or distortion. A Steinway grand piano stood near tall windows that overlooked the Atlantic Ocean, positioned so that performers could play while enjoying views of the sea. The dining room represented another triumph of design and decoration. Here, the Vanderbilts entertained their most important guests at formal dinners. The table could seat up to 34 people on gilt chairs. Rose alabaster columns supported the room's architectural framework, while the ceiling featured painting designed to resemble a sky scattered with clouds. Massive silver and gold serving pieces, some weighing hundreds of pounds, were displayed on sideboards that spanned nearly an entire wall. The room communicated not just wealth, but taste, refinement, and an understanding of European aristocratic traditions. Adjacent to the dining room, the billiard room provided a masculine retreat where gentlemen could retire after dinner for cigars, brandy, and games. The room featured red leather furnishings and dark wood paneling imported from Santo Domingo. The original billiard table remained centered under a stained glass skylight, its green felt surface ready for play. Hunting trophies and sporting paintings decorated the walls, creating an atmosphere distinctly different from the more refined spaces where ladies gathered. The second floor of the breakers housed the family's private quarters. Cornelius and Alice each had their own bedrooms and sitting rooms, decorated according to their personal tastes. The children's rooms were also on this floor, each designed with appropriate furnishings for young people. Ogden Codman Jr., a respected architect and interior designer, had been responsible for decorating these family spaces, working to create rooms that were comfortable and livable while maintaining the overall grandeur of the house. The third floor contained additional bedrooms for family members and important guests, as well as living quarters for some of the senior servants. This floor remained largely private, accessible only to family members and those servants whose duties required them to be there. The arrangement reflected the social hierarchies of the time, with different levels of the house corresponding to different levels of access and privilege. Below the main floors, the breakers concealed an entire world of service spaces. The kitchen occupied a separate wing, connected to dining areas by service corridors. Revolutionary for its time, it featured multiple coal-burning stoves and early electric appliances. Copper pots hung from ceiling racks, and numerous preparation areas could accommodate up to 30 kitchen workers during major entertainments. The butler's pantry served as the command center for formal dining service. Custom-built cabinets with glass fronts displayed the Vanderbilt family's monogrammed dinnerware, baccarat stemware, and extensive collection of silver. A dumbwaiter system transported food between floors, allowing meals to move from the kitchen to the dining room while maintaining appropriate temperatures. The butler orchestrated all aspects of formal service from this space, ensuring that each course arrived at precisely the right moment. Throughout the house, technological innovations demonstrated the Vanderbilt family's commitment to modern convenience. The Breakers was among the first private residences to be fully electrified, with electric lights in every room. However, mindful of the new technology's unreliability, gas fixtures were installed as backup. The house featured both fresh water and salt water plumbing systems, allowing for different types of bathing and washing. Central heating, powered by the boilers located beneath the front lawn, provided warmth during the cooler months of the season. The servants who maintained the breakers lived largely out of sight, but remained essential to the house's operation. 33 indoor servants were required to keep the mansion running smoothly. These staff members had their own quarters, dining areas, and workspaces, creating a parallel household that supported the visible splendor of the family's life. The boilers consumed over 150 tons of coal each year, a figure that speaks to the enormous energy required to heat and power such a large structure. The oceanside facade featured a loggia, an open-air covered area where family members could sit and enjoy sea breezes without direct sun exposure. This loggia became a favored spot for afternoon tea and quiet conversation, with the sound of waves breaking against the cliffs below providing constant backdrop. The grounds were maintained by 25 outdoor servants. Lawns were kept meticulously trimmed, flower beds planted according to season, and paths swept clean. This appearance of natural beauty required constant labor. The breakers was completed in 1895, just in time for the family to take up residence for that summer's social season. The first major event held in the new mansion was the debutante ball for Gertrude Vanderbilt, held in August of that year. This midnight dance introduced Gertrude to society and christened the breakers as the new center of Vanderbilt social life in Newport. Hundreds of guests attended, filling the music room and great hall with conversation, music, and the rustle of elaborate gowns. For the Vanderbilt family, the breakers became more than a summer residence. It was the stage on which they performed their roles in high society, entertaining presidents, European royalty, and leaders of industry. Every room had been designed with this purpose in mind, yet the breakers was also a home where the Vanderbilt children grew up and family dinners were held. This dual nature shaped how the family organized their time and activities. The cost of building and maintaining the breakers was substantial. Construction alone required the equivalent of nearly $200 million in current terms. Annual operating costs, including servant salaries, coal, food, and general maintenance, ran into tens of thousands of dollars. Property taxes alone reached $83,000 per year by the mid-1920s. These figures represented a significant portion of even the Vanderbilt fortune, demonstrating the family's commitment to maintaining their position in Newport society. The physical structure of the breakers organized and shaped daily life in countless ways. The placement of rooms determined who saw whom and when. The service corridors allowed servants to move through the house without disturbing family members or guests. The technological systems made certain activities possible while constraining others. The house was not merely a backdrop for life, it was an active participant in organizing how that life unfolded, creating the framework within which the Vanderbilt family's Newport existence took shape. The Marble House. Alternative: Alva's domain. While the breakers represented Cornelius Vanderbilt II's vision for Newport magnificence, another Vanderbilt mansion told a different but equally compelling story. Marble House, built for William Kissam Vanderbilt and his wife Alva between 1888 and 1892, predated the breakers, and in many ways set the standard that Cornelius felt compelled to match or exceed. William Kissam Vanderbilt was Cornelius's younger brother, and the two men maintained both familial bonds and friendly competition. William had inherited a substantial portion of the family fortune and, like his brother, worked in the railroad business. But it was his wife Alva who would make the more lasting mark on Newport society and on the social history of the Gilded Age. Alva Vanderbilt was born Alva Erskine Smith in Mobile, Alabama. Her family had money but lost much of it during the Civil War. Alva grew up understanding both wealth and its absence, an experience that shaped her fierce determination to secure and maintain social position. When she married William Vanderbilt in 1875, she gained access to one of America's great fortunes and immediately set about using it to achieve social prominence. Marble House was Alva's creation in a way that the breakers never quite was for Alice. While Alice worked with architects and designers, she tended to follow established patterns of taste and decorum. Alva, in contrast, had strong opinions about everything and insisted that they be implemented. She worked closely with Richard Morris Hunt, the same architect who would later design The Breakers, to create a mansion that would announce the Vanderbilt family's arrival at the pinnacle of American society. The house took its name from the 500,000 cubic feet of marble used in its construction. The total cost reached $11 million, of which $7 million was spent on marble alone. These figures, staggering even by Gilded Age standards, reflected Alva's conviction that only the finest materials and most expensive craftsmanship would suffice. The house was designed to evoke the Petit Trianon at Versailles, drawing explicit connections between the Vanderbilts and European aristocracy. William gave Marble House to Alva as a 39th birthday present, a gift that simultaneously demonstrated his wealth and acknowledged her importance to the family's social standing. The house contained 50 rooms and required a staff of 36 servants, including butlers, maids, coachmen, and footmen. The main floor featured a series of formal rooms, each decorated in a different historical style and each designed to impress visitors with the family's sophistication and taste. The Gold Ballroom, the most spectacular space in Marble House, lived up to its name with walls and ceiling covered in gold leaf. French furniture and elaborate decorations created an atmosphere of almost overwhelming richness. This room hosted some of Newport's most important social events, including balls and receptions that could accommodate hundreds of guests. The ballroom's very existence announced that the Vanderbilts had arrived, that they could host society on the grandest possible scale. The dining room at Marble House featured pink Numidian marble and gilt bronze capitals. The fireplace was a replica of one in the Salon d'Hercule at Versailles, continuing the theme of French aristocratic inspiration. The ceiling displayed painted decorations with hunting and fishing motifs, surrounding an 18th century French ceiling painting. Every detail had been carefully chosen to create a room suitable for the most formal and important dinner parties. Alva's bedroom on the second floor was decorated in the style of Louis XIV, with a ceiling painting of Athena dating to approximately 1721. This choice reflected Alva's identification with powerful women from history, her sense of herself as someone who could shape events and influence society. The room was both intensely private and carefully designed for its aesthetic impact, a combination that characterized much of Alva's approach to life. The library at Marble House served as both a morning room and an actual library, with carved walnut doors and bookcases created through collaboration between the decorating firm of Allard & Sons and the furniture maker Gilbert Kewell. This room reflected the family's intellectual pretensions and provided a more intimate space for reading, conversation, and afternoon tea. It was here that Alva and her female friends gathered during quieter moments, away from the more public spaces of the house. Marble House represented more than architectural achievement. It was a tool in Alva's campaign to dominate Newport society. She used the house to host elaborate entertainments and establish her position among the social elite. When her daughter Consuelo came of age, Alva used Marble House as the setting for launching her into society, eventually arranging Consuelo's marriage to the Duke of Marlborough. The social events at Marble House differed somewhat from those at the Breakers. Where Alice Vanderbilt favored traditional formal entertainments, Alva enjoyed more theatrical and sometimes shocking events. She pushed boundaries, challenged conventions, and generally made herself the center of attention. This approach earned her both admirers and critics, but it certainly ensured that Marble House remained central to Newport's social life. In 1895, Alva divorced William Vanderbilt, a shocking decision in an era when divorce among the wealthy was rare and scandalous. She retained ownership of Marble House, which had been given to her outright. The following year, she married Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont and moved to his mansion, Belcourt. After Belmont's death in 1908, Alva reopened Marble House and added the Chinese Tea House on the ocean side of the property. The Chinese Tea House, completed in 1914, became Alva's headquarters for a new campaign, women's suffrage. She used this exotic structure to host rallies and meetings supporting votes for women, bringing together her wealth, her social position, and her commitment to this cause. Tea was served on china painted with the words, "Votes for Women," turning afternoon refreshments into political statements. The contrast between Marble House and the Breakers illuminates different approaches to Newport life. The breakers emphasized family dignity, appropriate behavior, and traditional values. Marble House celebrated bold statements, social ambition, and individual will. Both mansions required enormous staffs, elaborate daily routines, and constant attention to maintain. Both served as stages for Newport's social dramas, but the spirit animating them differed, reflecting the distinct personalities of the women who presided over them. Daily life at Marble House followed patterns similar to those at the breakers, with servants rising early to prepare the house, family members pursuing their scheduled activities, and the constant round of social obligations that defined Newport existence. But Alva's more aggressive approach to social competition, her willingness to break rules and challenge expectations, created an atmosphere that was simultaneously more exciting and more exhausting than the more measured pace at the breakers. The relationship between the two houses and the two branches of the Vanderbilt family provides insight into how wealth alone did not determine social success in Newport. Personal style, strategic thinking, and the willingness to invest time and energy in social maneuvering all played important roles. Alva understood this better than most, and she used Marble House as her primary tool in the constant competition for social supremacy. Morning rituals and awakening. The day at a Vanderbilt mansion began long before the family members themselves awoke. In the hours before dawn, while darkness still covered Newport and the ocean beyond remained invisible, the first servants began their work. These early risers, typically the kitchen staff and housemaids, moved through the quiet halls, their footsteps careful not to disturb the sleeping family above. The kitchen staff arrived first, entering through the service entrance. Fires needed to be lit in the massive coal-burning stoves, a process that took time and careful attention. The stoves had to reach proper temperature before any cooking could begin. During these early hours, the kitchen gradually came to life. While the kitchen heated, housemaids moved through the public rooms on the main floor. Their task was to remove any evidence of the previous day's activities, to restore each room to its perfect state before family members might see it. Ashes were cleaned from fireplaces, furniture was dusted, floors were swept or mopped as appropriate, and fresh flowers were arranged in vases throughout the house. This work required quiet efficiency, the ability to complete physically demanding tasks while remaining essentially invisible. The butler rose early as well, though not quite as early as the maids. His morning routine included reviewing the day's schedule, checking the wine cellar to ensure that appropriate selections were available for meals, and overseeing the breakfast service preparations. The butler functioned as the conductor of the household orchestra, ensuring that all the various staff members performed their roles in harmony. He answered directly to the family but held authority over all the other servants, a position that required both diplomatic skill and firm management. Ladies' maids and valets who served the family members directly timed their mornings to be ready when their employers awoke. The lady's maid would enter her mistress's bedroom and help with the complex process of dressing for the day. In the Gilded Age, getting dressed was not something one did alone, at least not in wealthy households. The layers of undergarments, the corsets that needed to be laced, the elaborate gowns with their dozens of buttons and hooks all required assistance. Alice Vanderbilt typically rose between 8 and 9 o'clock during the Newport season. Her lady's maid would already have prepared the day's clothing, having selected a morning dress appropriate for the planned activities. The morning dress was always modest by the standards of later in the day, with high necklines, long sleeves, and fabrics like cotton or light wool. These garments were designed for private, domestic activities, not for being seen by society at large. The process of dressing began with undergarments, chemise, drawers, corset, and corset cover. The corset required careful lacing to achieve the small waist that fashion demanded. Over this foundation went petticoats and the dress itself. Stockings and shoes completed the outfit. The entire process took 30 minutes or more. While Alice dressed, Cornelius underwent his own morning routine in his separate suite. Men's clothing was somewhat simpler than women's, but even so, a valet's assistance made the process more efficient. Cornelius would wash and shave, tasks for which hot water had been brought by servants. His valet helped him dress in the full suit appropriate for morning wear, complete with jacket, vest, and all the expected accessories. Even in summer, even in the relative privacy of their own home, formal standards of dress were maintained. The Vanderbilt children's mornings varied depending on their ages. Younger children had governesses who supervised their routines, ensured they were properly dressed, and oversaw their breakfast in the nursery or schoolroom. Older children dressed with assistance from maids and joined the family for breakfast in the dining room. By the time the children reached their teenage years, they were expected to understand and follow all the complex rules governing dress and behavior. Breakfast at the Breakers was relatively informal by the standards of the day, though it still involved considerable formality. The family gathered in the breakfast room or morning room, where the meal was served by footmen. The menu typically included eggs, toast, fruit, and various other items. Coffee and tea were served from silver services. Alice used the morning hours to attend to her correspondence, a task that consumed significant time. Social life in the Gilded Age generated enormous amounts of mail. Invitations needed to be answered, thank you notes written, social obligations acknowledged. Alice would sit at her desk in the morning room, writing in her careful hand, while her social secretary assisted with the more routine communications. This correspondence was not optional. It was a crucial part of maintaining the family's social position. Cornelius, meanwhile, often dealt with business matters during the morning. Even in Newport, even during what was theoretically a vacation, his responsibilities as head of the New York Central Railroad continued. Telegrams arrived regularly, reports needed to be reviewed, decisions made. He maintained a study where he could work in relative peace, though the boundary between vacation and work was always somewhat porous for a man in his position. The morning hours also provided time for the family to pursue individual interests without the constant social obligations that would dominate the afternoon and evening. Alice might spend time with her children, review household accounts with the housekeeper, or plan upcoming entertainments. The children pursued their studies if governesses were present or engaged in approved leisure activities. Reading was considered appropriate for morning hours, as was music practice for those children learning instruments. The smooth functioning of these morning routines depended entirely on the servants' invisible labor. The breakfast that appeared as if by magic had required hours of preparation. The clean rooms, the fresh flowers, the perfectly pressed clothing, all resulted from work that began before the family awakened. This parallel household of servants followed its own routines and schedules, organized to support the family's needs while remaining as unobtrusive as possible. The housekeeper, a senior servant who managed the female staff, held morning meetings with the maids to assign tasks and address any issues. The chef met with the steward to discuss meals for the day, taking into account any special events or dietary requirements. The butler reviewed the dining room preparations and ensured that the footmen understood their duties. This invisible management allowed the visible household to function with apparent effortlessness. By mid-morning, typically around 11 o'clock, the house had fully awakened. All the family members were dressed and engaged in their various activities. Servants moved through their assigned duties. The kitchen prepared for lunch. Fresh laundry was being washed and hung. The daily rhythm had been established, a rhythm that would carry through until evening brought its own set of obligations and entertainments. The rhythm of the day, structured hours. Once the morning routines had been completed, the Vanderbilt family's day unfolded according to a carefully structured schedule that was understood, if not always explicitly stated, by everyone in Newport society. This schedule was not merely a matter of personal preference. It was a social framework that organized interactions, determined when certain activities were appropriate, and generally provided the structure within which Gilded Age life operated. The late morning hours from approximately 11 o'clock until 1 o'clock were considered appropriate for certain specific activities. Women might go shopping, though this was not shopping in the modern sense of browsing and buying on impulse. Rather, it involved visiting specific establishments where dressmakers, milliners, and other merchants expected them. Appointments were often made in advance, and the proprietors knew their customers' preferences and measurements. The shopping expedition was as much a social event as a practical necessity. Carriage rides through Newport represented another acceptable late-morning activity. The Vanderbilts maintained several carriages and the horses and coachmen necessary to drive them. These vehicles were works of art in themselves, beautifully maintained and driven by coachmen in livery. A carriage ride allowed family members to see and be seen, to enjoy the ocean breezes and to visit other estates or points of interest around Newport. The routes were well established, and one could be reasonably certain of encountering other members of society during these excursions. Lunch was typically served between 1 and 2 o'clock. This was a lighter meal than dinner, often featuring cold dishes, salads, and lighter fare appropriate to the summer season and the middle of the day. The family might eat in the breakfast room or, on pleasant days, on the loggia overlooking the ocean. Guests were sometimes invited for lunch, particularly close friends or family members, though this was less formal than dinner invitations. After lunch came the crucial calling hours, one of the most important social rituals of Newport life. Between 3 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it was appropriate for ladies to pay calls on one another. These visits followed strict protocols that everyone understood. A lady would arrive at a house in her carriage, announce herself to the butler, and be shown to the drawing room or morning room. If the lady of the house was at home, meaning she was receiving visitors, the guest would be invited to sit and conversation would ensue. These calls typically lasted between 15 and 30 minutes. The conversation touched on acceptable topics, mutual acquaintances, upcoming social events, perhaps current artistic matters. Politics and business were generally avoided. The hostess would offer tea or light refreshments served by servants who appeared with perfect timing. The system of calling cards added another layer of complexity to this ritual. If a lady was not receiving visitors or if she was out, the caller would leave her calling card with the butler. This card served multiple purposes. It acknowledged the attempt to visit, it fulfilled a social obligation, and it conveyed information about the caller's status. The size and quality of the card, the engraving, even the corners that might be turned down to indicate different types of visits, all communicated subtle social messages. Alice Vanderbilt, like other ladies in her position, designated certain days when she was at home to receive callers. This arrangement allowed her to manage her social obligations efficiently while ensuring that those who wished to pay their respects had the opportunity to do so. The calling hours at the breakers became well known, and, on designated days, a steady stream of carriages would arrive, deposit their passengers, and depart, returning later to collect them. While the women engaged in calling, men pursued different afternoon activities. Cornelius might review business correspondence that had arrived on the morning train from New York, or he might meet with his estate manager to discuss matters related to the property. During peak season, when he was in Newport, business never entirely stopped, and he had to balance his family and social obligations with his ongoing responsibilities to the railroad. For men of Vanderbilt's class, afternoon recreation often took the form of sports. The Newport Casino, built in 1880, offered lawn tennis courts where men could play or watch matches. Golf was beginning to gain popularity, though it had not yet achieved the widespread acceptance it would later enjoy. Some men preferred yachting, taking their vessels out onto Narragansett Bay for afternoon sails. These activities were not purely recreational. They provided opportunities for business discussions and relationship building in more relaxed settings than formal office meetings. The Vanderbilt children's afternoons were structured around their ages and stages of development. Young children continued lessons with their governesses. Older children might participate in approved social activities, tennis at the casino, supervised beach outings, or calls with their mother to learn the social skills they would need as adults. The teenage years were crucial for absorbing the complex rules and expectations that governed high society, and Newport provided an immersive environment for this education. Beach activities required careful management in the Gilded Age. Swimming was done in bathing machines, wheeled cabins that could be rolled into the ocean, allowing bathers to enter the water with some privacy. Bathing costumes were elaborate, covering most of the body even while in the water. The beach was not a place for casual relaxation, but rather another social venue where appropriate behavior and dress were required. The late afternoon hours, from approximately 5 to 7 o'clock, provided a brief interlude before the evening's activities began. This was when families might gather for tea, a ritual imported from British aristocratic practice. Tea time offered a less formal opportunity for conversation, for children to spend time with parents, and for the family to regroup before the demands of the evening. Tea service itself was elaborate, with fine china, silver services, and an array of small cakes, sandwiches, and other delicacies. The ritual could take place in various locations: the library, a drawing room, or on pleasant days, outdoors on the loggia or in the garden. Servants moved quietly through the service, replenishing supplies and removing used dishes without disrupting the conversation. During these afternoon and early evening hours, the servants were engaged in their own intensive activities. Preparations for dinner had to begin well in advance, with the kitchen staff working on the evening's menu. Upstairs, ladies' maids prepared their mistresses' evening gowns, ensuring that every detail was perfect. The butler oversaw preparations in the dining room, checking that the table was properly set, that the correct glassware and silver were in place, and that the footmen understood their duties for the evening service. The transition from afternoon to evening was marked by another change of clothing. Family members retired to their rooms around 6 or 7 o'clock to dress for dinner. This process, particularly for women, was even more elaborate than the morning routine. Evening dress required different undergarments, a different corset designed to allow the lower necklines and more fitted bodices of evening gowns, and considerable time for hair arrangement. Jewels were brought out, appropriate for evening wear in ways they would not be during the day. The rhythm of the Vanderbilt day in Newport was both rigid and flexible. The major anchoring points were fixed: meal times, calling hours, certain social events. But within this framework, there was room for individual preference and spontaneous activity. The structure provided security and predictability, while still allowing for the variety that prevented days from becoming monotonous. This structured approach to time served several purposes. It organized the complex social interactions that were central to Newport life. It provided a framework that all families understood, making coordination of social activities possible. It also distinguished the wealthy from those who worked for wages, whose time was determined by the demands of labor rather than by social convention. The ability to organize one's day around social rather than economic imperatives was itself a marker of elite status. The daily rhythm at the breakers reflected and reinforced the family's position in Newport society. By adhering to the expected schedule, by participating in the right activities at the right times, the Vanderbilts demonstrated their understanding of and commitment to the social order. This was not mere conformity. It was active participation in the maintenance of a social system from which the family derived both pleasure and prestige. The servant infrastructure. Behind every moment of apparent ease at the breakers stood an enormous infrastructure of human labor. The 33 indoor servants who maintained the household represented only part of the total workforce required to keep the estate functioning. Understanding how these servants organized their own lives and work provides crucial insight into how the Vanderbilt family's daily routine was made possible. The servant hierarchy at the breakers followed well-established patterns. At the top stood the butler, who managed all aspects of household service. He supervised the footmen, oversaw dining room service, managed the wine cellar, and served as the primary interface between family and serving staff. Below the butler in the male servant hierarchy came the footmen, typically younger men who handled many of the physical tasks associated with service. They served meals, answered doors, carried messages, and assisted with various household tasks. Footmen were chosen partly for their height and appearance, as they represented the household in their interactions with visitors and needed to make a good impression. They wore livery, distinctive uniforms that identified them with the Vanderbilt household. The female servant hierarchy was headed by the housekeeper, a woman of significant responsibility who managed all the female servants and oversaw the general cleanliness and order of the house. She met daily with the cook to plan meals, with the head housemaid to organize cleaning schedules, and with the laundress to coordinate the enormous task of washing and caring for the household linens. The housekeeper also managed the household accounts related to domestic supplies, ordering what was needed and keeping careful records of expenditures. Housemaids formed the largest single category of female servants. These women were responsible for the physical maintenance of the house, dusting, sweeping, polishing, maintaining fires in the fireplaces, and generally ensuring that every room met the exacting standards expected in a Vanderbilt mansion. The work was physically demanding, often requiring housemaids to be on their feet for most of the day. They started early and finished late, with only a few hours of rest in between. The work of housemaids followed seasonal patterns as well as daily ones. In the spring, when the family first arrived in Newport, a thorough cleaning of the entire house was necessary to remove the dust and mustiness that had accumulated over the winter months. Furniture covers were removed, windows washed, carpets beaten, and every surface scrubbed. This spring cleaning required all hands working at full capacity for several days or even weeks. During the summer season itself, the maids' work focused on daily maintenance and preparation for entertaining. Before any major event, additional cleaning was necessary. Floors needed extra polishing. Silver required special attention. Guest rooms had to be prepared for overnight visitors. The maids worked in teams, with more experienced women training newer staff and ensuring that standards were maintained. The laundry operations at the breakers represented a massive undertaking. The volume of linens requiring washing was staggering. Bed sheets, pillowcases, tablecloths, napkins, towels, and all the family's personal clothing. The laundresses worked in a separate laundry building, where the heat, steam, and physical demands created challenging conditions. The process began with sorting items by type and degree of soiling. Different fabrics required different treatment. Heavy items like bed linens could be washed vigorously, but delicate gowns required gentler handling. Ironing was particularly labor-intensive, with multiple irons heating on stoves. The kitchen staff formed their own distinct world within the larger servant hierarchy. The head chef or cook ruled over this domain, planning menus, directing the preparation of meals, and generally ensuring that food met the family's expectations. Multiple assistant cooks worked under the chef's direction, each responsible for specific tasks. During major entertainments, additional temporary kitchen staff might be hired to handle the increased workload. Food preparation in the Gilded Age required considerable skill and time. Without modern appliances or conveniences, everything was made from scratch. Bread was baked daily. Stocks simmered for hours, sauces required careful attention, and elaborate desserts demanded both technical skill and artistic presentation. The chef at the breakers needed to be capable of producing sophisticated French cuisine, the standard for elite dining, as well as managing the simpler fare required for family meals. The kitchen operated on its own schedule, driven by meal times but extending well before and after. Breakfast preparations began in the early morning hours, as previously mentioned. After breakfast was cleared, attention turned to lunch. Once lunch was served and cleaned up, the kitchen staff began the extensive preparations for dinner, the most important meal of the day. During major entertainments, when dinner might be followed by a late supper for ball guests, the kitchen staff worked well into the night. Personal servants occupied a unique position in the household hierarchy. Ladies' maids who dressed and attended to individual family members worked closely with their employers and often developed relationships that went beyond the merely professional. The lady's maid needed to understand her mistress's preferences, moods, and needs. She arranged hair, selected clothing, packed for trips, and generally served as a confidential assistant. This proximity to the family gave lady's maid status among the servants while also requiring discretion and loyalty. Valets performed similar functions for male family members, though their duties were somewhat different given the simpler nature of men's clothing. Still, the valet needed to know his employer's preferences, maintain clothing in perfect condition, and generally provide personal service that freed the gentleman from having to attend to such matters himself. The relationship between a gentleman and his valet could last for years, becoming one of mutual dependence and even respect. The outdoor staff, though not technically part of the indoor servant count, were equally essential to the estate's functioning. Gardeners maintained the extensive grounds, ensuring that flower beds were always in bloom, that lawns were perfectly manicured, and that trees and shrubs were properly trimmed. Coachmen cared for the horses and carriages, keeping both in pristine condition and ready for use at any time. Stable boys assisted with these tasks and learned the skills they would need to advance in the hierarchy of outdoor servants. The living conditions for servants at the breakers varied considerably depending on position. Senior servants like the butler and housekeeper might have small private rooms. More junior servants shared quarters, often in attic spaces or in separate servant wings. These rooms were functional rather than comfortable, furnished with simple beds, washstands, and small storage for personal belongings. Privacy was limited, and servants spent most of their waking hours working rather than in their quarters. Meals for servants were taken in the servants' hall, a large room in the service areas of the house. The food was substantial and adequate, though not of the same quality as what was served to the family. A strict hierarchy governed even these meals, with senior servants sitting at the head of the table and junior servants knowing their places. Meals provided one of the few times when servants could socialize and share information about the household. The servants' work week was demanding. Most worked 6 days a week, with Sunday afternoons as their primary time off. Even on Sundays, essential work continued, as meals still needed to be prepared and basic household functions maintained. During the peak of the social season, when the family entertained frequently, even this limited free time might be curtailed. The work was hard, the hours long, and the demands constant. Despite these challenges, positions in the Vanderbilt household were sought after. The pay was generally good by the standards of domestic service. The conditions were better than in many households, and the prestige of working for such a prominent family enhanced a servant's reputation. An experienced servant from the breakers could command higher wages elsewhere, using their Vanderbilt service as a credential. The relationship between servants and family was complex and carefully regulated. Servants were expected to be essentially invisible, performing their duties without drawing attention to themselves. They learned to move quietly, to anticipate needs without being asked, to maintain a neutral expression and demeanor at all times while on duty. This invisibility was not literal, of course, but rather a social convention that allowed the family to enjoy the benefits of service without having to acknowledge the human beings providing it. Yet within this framework, individual relationships did develop. A lady's maid who had served the same mistress for years understood that woman's preferences and moods better than anyone. The butler who had managed the household for decades knew the family's routines and could often solve problems before the family even knew they existed. These were not friendships in the modern sense, but they were relationships built on long familiarity and mutual dependence. The servant infrastructure at the breakers was remarkable not for its size, though that was considerable, but for its efficiency and organization. Every task had its designated person. Every function had its established procedure. Every problem had its anticipated solution. This level of organization allowed the family to enjoy a lifestyle that appeared effortless, while actually depending on the coordinated labor of dozens of people working with skill and dedication. Afternoon society and leisure. As the calling hours concluded and tea time approached, the Vanderbilt family's attention turned to the various leisure activities that filled the late afternoon hours. These activities were carefully calibrated to maintain the delicate balance between social obligations and personal pleasure that characterized Newport life. For Alice Vanderbilt and other women of her class, afternoon leisure often centered on refined pursuits. Reading was considered appropriate for ladies, and the Breakers Library contained an extensive collection. Literature, poetry, and works of history or biography were all acceptable. The library provided a quiet space for reading away from constant social demands. Needlework represented another acceptable afternoon occupation for women. While servants handled the practical sewing required to maintain the household's linens, ladies engaged in decorative needlework as an art form and a leisure activity. Embroidery, decorative stitching, and similar crafts demonstrated both skill and patience. Women often worked on these projects during afternoon hours, either alone or in small groups, conversation flowing as needles moved through fabric. Music played an important role in the Vanderbilt household. Both Alice and Cornelius were musically inclined. He played the violin while she played the piano. During quiet afternoon hours, they might play together, enjoying music for its own sake rather than as entertainment for guests. The children's afternoon activities varied with their ages. Younger children continued with structured learning under the supervision of governesses. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and other basic subjects filled much of their time. As they grew older, the curriculum expanded to include languages, particularly French, which was considered essential for anyone who would participate in high society. Music lessons, dancing lessons, and instruction in proper deportment all formed part of their education. Older Vanderbilt children had more freedom in their afternoon activities, though still within carefully defined boundaries. They might play tennis at the casino, visit friends with parental approval, or participate in supervised beach outings. The teenage years were a time of learning adult social behaviors, and Newport provided an ideal environment for this education. Every interaction offered lessons in proper conduct, appropriate conversation, and the subtle art of social navigation. For Cornelius and other men of his generation, afternoon hours sometimes involved business correspondence or meetings, even during the summer season. The railroad did not stop operating simply because its president was in Newport. Telegrams arrived regularly, requiring attention and response. Sometimes business associates would visit Newport, ostensibly for social reasons, but actually to discuss matters of commerce and industry. The boundary between work and leisure remained permeable for men whose business interests were vast and complex. Yachting represented one of the most prestigious leisure activities available in Newport. The deep waters of Narragansett Bay could accommodate large sailing vessels, and many wealthy families maintained yachts as a matter of course. While the Vanderbilts were not as obsessed with yachting as some Newport families, they did participate in this aspect of social life. An afternoon sail provided opportunities for business discussions, relationship building, and genuine enjoyment of the sea. The New York Yacht Club maintained a station in Newport, and members gathered there for both social and sporting purposes. Races were organized, bringing together yachts from various owners in competitions that attracted significant attention. These events combined sport, social gathering, and display of wealth in ways that perfectly captured the Newport spirit. Watching yacht races became a popular afternoon activity, with spectators gathering along the shore or on other vessels to observe the contests. The Newport Casino offered additional afternoon entertainment. Tennis courts allowed for matches and practice. The building itself contained reading rooms, a theater, and various other facilities designed for the amusement of Newport's summer residents. Men gathered there to read newspapers, discuss current events, and generally socialize in an environment specifically designed for their comfort and convenience. Croquet on the casino's lawns provided another popular pastime. This game, requiring skill and strategy, could be played by both men and women, making it one of the few sports that allowed for mixed-gender competition. Afternoon croquet games became social events in themselves, with onlookers gathering to watch and socialize while players competed. The game's relatively gentle physical demands made it accessible even to those who were not particularly athletic. For those interested in more active pursuits, lawn bowling was available. This ancient game had been adopted by Newport society and provided afternoon entertainment for those who enjoyed it. The casino maintained excellent bowling greens, and competitions were organized regularly. Like other sports, lawn bowling served multiple purposes. It was recreation, social event, and another venue for demonstrating skill and good form. Afternoon drives represented a particularly important social activity. The daily carriage parade along Bellevue Avenue and Ocean Drive became one of Newport's defining rituals. Families would drive in their finest carriages, drawn by their best horses and driven by coachmen in full livery. The route was well established, and during peak season, the roads became congested with elegant vehicles, all moving at a stately pace that allowed occupants to see and be seen. These carriage rides were not merely about transportation. They were performances. The carriages themselves were works of art, maintained in perfect condition and representing significant investments. The horses were carefully bred and trained. The coachmen wore distinctive livery that identified the household they served. Every element of the carriage ride was designed to make a statement about the family's wealth, taste, and social position. The Vanderbilt carriages were among the finest in Newport. Maintained by dedicated grooms and coachmen, they featured the latest designs and the highest quality materials. When Alice or Cornelius drove through Newport, everyone knew who they were. both from the distinctive appearance of the carriage and from the recognized faces of family members. This visibility was precisely the point. Newport society depended on being seen and recognized. Ocean Drive, which ran along the coast south of the Mansion District, provided particularly scenic views. Families would drive this route in the late afternoon, enjoying the ocean vistas and the cooling breezes. Stops at designated viewpoints allowed for brief conversations between occupants of different carriages, maintaining social connections while ostensibly enjoying nature. These interactions, though brief and somewhat formal, helped maintain the web of relationships that constituted Newport society. For those who preferred to walk rather than ride, the cliff walk offered a unique opportunity. This public path ran along the ocean behind many of the great estates, including the breakers. Family members sometimes strolled along the walk, enjoying the ocean air and the dramatic views of waves crashing against the rocks below. However, they shared this path with ordinary citizens, creating one of the few spaces where different social classes might encounter one another in Newport. The late afternoon hours also provided time for rest and quiet reflection. The constant round of social activities could be exhausting, and the opportunity to simply sit quietly, perhaps on the loggia overlooking the ocean, was not to be underestimated. These moments of peace allowed family members to recharge before the evening's activities began, to enjoy their surroundings without performing for an audience, to simply be rather than constantly do. The wardrobe ballet, changing for every occasion. Perhaps no aspect of daily life at the breakers better demonstrates the complexity of Gilded Age social existence than the multiple changes of clothing required throughout a single day. For women in particular, the expectation that one would wear appropriate attire for each activity and time of day created an elaborate routine that consumed significant time and required substantial assistance. The morning dress, as previously mentioned, was designed for private, domestic activities. High-necked and long-sleeved, made from relatively modest fabrics like cotton or lightweight wool, it allowed a woman to move through her morning routine while maintaining appropriate standards of modesty and propriety. The morning dress made no claim to grandeur. It was functional, comfortable within the limits of contemporary fashion, and suitable for activities like correspondence, household management, and time with children. As the day progressed toward calling hours, a change to afternoon dress became necessary. The afternoon dress represented a step up in formality. It featured richer fabrics like silk or taffeta, slightly bolder colors, and more elaborate decoration. The neckline might be somewhat lower and the sleeves could be shorter. Jewelry appropriate for afternoon wear might include a watch on a chain, modest earrings, and perhaps a brooch. The process of changing from morning to afternoon dress required the assistance of a lady's maid. The morning dress had to be removed, including all its various fastenings. Different undergarments might be required for the afternoon dress, particularly if the style demanded a different silhouette. The corset might need to be adjusted or even changed entirely. The afternoon dress itself had to be put on carefully, with the maid managing buttons, hooks, and other closures that the wearer could not reach alone. Hair also required adjustment when changing dress. Morning hairstyles were relatively simple, designed to last through domestic activities. Afternoon styles needed more attention as they would be seen by society. The lady's maid would rearrange her mistress's hair, adding decorative combs or other accessories as appropriate. The entire process of changing from morning to afternoon attire could easily consume 30 minutes or more. For afternoon carriage rides or other outdoor activities, additional layers might be necessary. A visiting jacket or dolman-style wrap could be worn over the afternoon dress, providing warmth and protection from dust, while also serving as a fashion statement. Gloves were essential for any venture outside the house, and the correct gloves for each outfit and occasion represented yet another layer of complexity in the wardrobe. Hats, too, varied with the time of day and the specific activity, from relatively simple day hats to more elaborate creations designed to make an impression. Tea gowns represented a unique category of dress that emerged during this period. These garments could be worn in the late afternoon at home, particularly during private tea time with family or very close friends. The tea gown's defining characteristic was that it could be worn without a corset, providing welcome relief from the constant constriction that fashionable dress demanded. Flowing and artistic, often featuring Asian-inspired designs or aesthetic movement influences, the tea gown allowed women to be comfortable while still looking elegant and refined. However, tea gowns were strictly for private, domestic settings. They could never be worn for formal calling or any activity that involved going out into society. The tea gown represented a small concession to comfort within the otherwise relentless demands of fashionable dress. For women like Alice Vanderbilt, who spent much of their day in tightly laced corsets, the opportunity to wear a tea gown in the late afternoon provided genuine physical relief. As evening approached, the most elaborate change of the day took place. Evening dress featured low necklines exposing shoulders and décolletage, defined waists, and rich fabrics like silk, satin, and velvet. Elaborate embroidery, beading, and other decorations added weight and visual interest. Preparing for evening required changing all undergarments. A different corset, designed to allow lower necklines, had to be put on. Additional petticoats might be needed. The evening dress itself, with its trains and elaborate construction, required careful handling. Hair for evening was styled with particular care. Evening hairstyles were tall, elaborate constructions featuring curls, twists, and decorative elements. The process could take an hour or more, with the lady's maid working patiently to create the desired effect. False hairpieces might be added to increase volume and height. Decorative combs, jeweled pins, or even small tiaras completed the arrangement. Jewelry for evening wear was significantly more elaborate than daytime pieces. Necklaces featuring diamonds, pearls, or other precious stones were brought out. Matching earrings and bracelets completed the ensemble. These jewels were statements of wealth and status, visible demonstrations of the family's resources. Gloves for evening were long, extending well past the elbow. White was the standard color for formal evening gloves, though other light colors might be acceptable depending on the gown. These gloves had to be put on carefully to avoid wrinkles or damage. They would be removed for dinner but worn for dancing and other evening activities. The etiquette surrounding gloves was complex, with specific rules about when they should be worn, removed, and replaced. Fans represented another essential accessory for evening dress. These were not merely functional items for creating cooling breezes, though they served that purpose. Fans were also fashion statements and even instruments of communication. The language of fans, though often exaggerated in later accounts, did exist to some degree, with different ways of holding or moving a fan conveying subtle messages. More importantly, fans provided something for women to do with their hands and added another element of grace and elegance to their appearance. For men, evening dress was more standardized but still required attention to detail. The tailcoat or tuxedo, depending on the formality of the occasion, needed to be perfectly fitted and pressed. White tie for the most formal events, black tie for somewhat less formal occasions. The vest, shirt, and all accessories had to coordinate properly. Shoes were polished to a high shine. While men's evening wear was less elaborate than women's, it still required the assistance of a valet to achieve the proper effect. The Vanderbilt children, as they grew older, were also expected to change dress throughout the day. Young children might not need as many changes, but by the teenage years, they were following the same patterns as their parents. Learning to navigate this complex world of changing dress was part of their education in becoming members of high society. The process taught them about social expectations, about the visual language of class and status, and about the importance of always presenting the appropriate image for each situation. The servants who managed all this clothing faced their own considerable challenges. Each dress required careful handling, storage, and maintenance. Delicate fabrics could be easily damaged. Elaborate decorations needed special attention. The lady's maid had to know which dress was appropriate for which occasion, how to arrange each one properly, and how to make quick repairs if something went wrong. The valet had similar responsibilities for male clothing, though the generally simpler nature of men's dress made his job somewhat less complex. The laundry generated by all these clothing changes was substantial. Undergarments needed frequent washing. Gowns required careful cleaning when they became soiled, a process that often involved specialized techniques for different fabrics and decorations. The laundresses at the breakers were skilled professionals, capable of cleaning the most delicate garments without damage. Their work made the constant changes of dress possible, ensuring that fresh, clean clothing was always available. Storage of all these garments required significant space. Wardrobes, closets, and clothing storage rooms were filled with the various dresses, undergarments, shoes, and accessories that wealthy women required. An inventory of a typical wealthy woman's wardrobe from this period would include dozens of dresses, multiple sets of undergarments for different purposes, numerous pairs of shoes, and countless accessories. Alice Vanderbilt's wardrobe was likely even more extensive than average, given her social position and the frequency with which she entertained and was entertained. The multiple changes of clothing throughout the day served several purposes beyond mere fashion. They demonstrated that the wearer had the leisure time necessary to devote to such elaborate rituals. They showed that the family could afford extensive wardrobes and the servants necessary to maintain them. They allowed individuals to signal their understanding of and compliance with social expectations, and they created a visual language through which social competition could be enacted. Who had the most fashionable gowns? Who wore the most impressive jewels? Who best embodied the standards of taste and elegance? These questions were answered in part through the elaborate ballet of changing dress. Evening entertainment and dining. As twilight descended over Newport and the ocean began its transformation from bright blue to darker shades, the breakers prepared for the most formal and important hours of the day. Evening at a Vanderbilt mansion was when the house truly came into its own, when all the elaborate preparations reached their culmination, and when the family performed their most public roles. Dinner was the centerpiece of the evening, typically served at 8 o'clock. This was not a casual meal, but a formal event that could last for 2 hours or more. The preparation for dinner began hours earlier, with the kitchen staff working through their carefully planned menus. The chef had likely planned the menu days in advance, particularly if guests were expected, coordinating with the housekeeper to ensure that all necessary ingredients were available. The dining room at the breakers was prepared with meticulous attention to detail. The butler oversaw every aspect of the setup, from the placement of chairs to the arrangement of flowers. The table was set with fine china bearing the Vanderbilt monogram, crystal glasses from Baccarat, and silver serving pieces that were themselves works of art. Fresh flowers adorned the center of the table, their arrangement designed to add beauty without obstructing sight lines between diners. The seating plan for dinner parties required careful consideration. At formal dinners with guests, the host and hostess sat at opposite ends of the table. Guests were arranged according to complex rules of precedence, with the most important guests receiving places of honor. Men and women alternated, and careful attention was paid to ensuring that compatible individuals sat near one another. A poorly planned seating arrangement could doom an entire dinner party. For family dinners without guests, the arrangement was simpler, though formality was still maintained. Cornelius sat at the head of the table, Alice at the foot. The children were placed along the sides in order of age, the oldest closest to the parents. Even in these more intimate settings, proper behavior was expected. Conversation was to be pleasant but not frivolous, table manners perfect, dress appropriate. The dinner itself consisted of multiple courses, each served with perfect timing. A formal dinner in the Gilded Age might include 7 or more courses: soup, fish, an entree, a releve or roast, salad, dessert, and fruit or cheese to conclude. Between some courses, a sorbet might be served to cleanse the palate. The progression of dishes followed established patterns, with specific wines paired with particular courses. Footmen served the meal under the butler's direction. They moved around the table with practiced efficiency, offering dishes from the left, removing plates from the right, refilling wine glasses without being asked. Their movements were choreographed to make service appear effortless. Conversation during dinner followed its own rules. Controversial topics were avoided. Politics and business were generally not discussed at the dinner table, particularly when ladies were present. Instead, Conversation touched on lighter matters: travel, art, literature, mutual acquaintances, upcoming social events. The host and hostess bore responsibility for keeping conversation flowing, for ensuring that all guests were included, and for preventing any awkward silences. After the main courses had been served and cleared, dessert arrived. This might be an elaborate creation featuring multiple components, presented with considerable artistic flair. Gilded Age desserts could be architectural marvels, towers of spun sugar, or delicate pastries that demonstrated the chef's skill. After dessert came fruit and cheese, the final course before the ladies withdrew. The tradition of ladies withdrawing after dinner was firmly established. Once the meal concluded, Alice would rise, and other ladies present would follow. They retired to the drawing room or library, leaving the men at the table. This separation allowed men to smoke cigars and drink port or brandy, activities considered inappropriate in the presence of ladies. The men remaining at the table, led by Cornelius, might discuss business matters that had been avoided during dinner proper. The conversation became less constrained, the topics more varied. Cigars were offered, their aromatic smoke filling the dining room. Port or brandy circulated, each man taking what he wished. This was a masculine space, deliberately separated from the feminine sphere, allowing for a different kind of conversation and camaraderie. After 30 minutes or an hour, the men would rejoin the ladies in the drawing room or music room. Coffee was served, providing a final social hour before the evening concluded. If there were no other entertainment planned, conversation might continue for a while before guests departed. The host and hostess would see their guests to the door, exchange final pleasantries, and watch as carriages pulled away into the Newport night. However, many evenings did not end with dinner. Particularly during the height of the season, dinner might be followed by additional entertainment. The music room at the Breakers was designed for exactly this purpose. Musicians might perform, either professional entertainers hired for the occasion or talented amateurs from among the family and guests. Gertrude Vanderbilt became an accomplished musician, and her performances in the music room were highlights of some evenings. Dancing represented another popular form of evening entertainment. The music room and adjacent spaces could accommodate dancing, with the furniture moved aside and musicians providing appropriate music. Balls were the grandest form of this entertainment, with hundreds of guests invited and elaborate preparations made. Gertrude's debutante ball in 1895 represented the pinnacle of such events, introducing her to society in a setting designed to showcase both her and the magnificent new mansion. Smaller dinner dances occurred more frequently than full balls. These might include 20 or 30 couples, enough to make dancing enjoyable, but not so many that the event became unwieldy. The music, the dancing, the opportunity to socialize in this more relaxed atmosphere all contributed to the evening's success. Young people particularly enjoyed these events, as they provided opportunities to interact with potential romantic partners under the watchful but somewhat distant eyes of their parents. Card games provided another form of evening entertainment. Bridge, whist, and other games were popular among both men and women. Card tables could be set up in various rooms, allowing multiple games to proceed simultaneously. Some guests preferred cards to dancing, and a well-planned evening provided options for different preferences. The stakes in these games were rarely high. The primary purpose was entertainment and socialization, rather than gambling. The library served as a quieter alternative for those who preferred conversation to more active entertainments. Men might retreat there to smoke and talk, while women could gather for more intimate discussions. The library's book-lined walls, comfortable furniture, and generally peaceful atmosphere made it an attractive option for those who found the music room or ballroom too crowded or too loud. Throughout all these evening activities, servants moved quietly through the rooms, ensuring that refreshments were available, that the temperature remained comfortable, and that every detail of the entertainment proceeded smoothly. Footmen refreshed drinks, maids ensured that ladies' rooms were available if needed for repairs to gowns or hair, and the butler oversaw it all with the same attention to detail that characterized his management of dinner service. As the evening drew to a close, typically around 11 o'clock or midnight for ordinary dinners, guests began to depart. The ritual of leave-taking was itself elaborate, with farewells exchanged, thanks offered, and promises made to see one another again soon. The Vanderbilts stood at the door, seeing each guest off personally, a courtesy that was expected and appreciated. Once the last guest had departed, the family could finally relax. The public performance was over, the social obligations fulfilled. The house gradually quieted as the family retired to their private quarters. Servants began the work of cleaning up, of restoring rooms to order, of preparing for the next day's activities. This work would continue well into the night, ensuring that when the family awakened the following morning, no trace of the previous evening's entertainment would remain. The pattern of formal dinners and evening entertainments repeated throughout the season, with variations in scale and elaboration depending on the occasion. Some evenings were quiet family dinners. Others were large affairs with many guests. The most elaborate events, the balls and major receptions, occurred less frequently but required weeks of preparation and left lasting impressions on all who attended. Beyond the walls, Newport's broader social life. While much of the Vanderbilt family's time in Newport was spent at the breakers or visiting other private homes, the broader social life of the resort extended beyond mansion walls. Newport offered various venues and activities that allowed society to gather, compete, and display itself in semi-public settings. The Newport Casino stood as perhaps the most important of these venues. Built in 1880 by James Gordon Bennett, Jr., the casino was never a gambling establishment despite its name. Instead, it served as a social and sporting club exclusively for Newport's summer residents. The building, designed by the architectural firm of McKim, Mead, and White, featured lawn tennis courts, a theater, reading rooms, and various other facilities designed for the entertainment and comfort of the wealthy. Tennis at the casino became one of Newport's defining activities. The sport had been introduced to America relatively recently, and Newport quickly became one of its centers. The first United States National Men's Singles Championship was held at the Newport Casino in 1881. This prestigious tournament continued there until 1914. The Vanderbilt family participated in tennis culture to varying degrees. The younger members played regularly at the casino. The sport offered socially acceptable exercise and opportunities to demonstrate skill. The casino also hosted theatrical performances in its small but elegant theater. Traveling companies would come to Newport during the summer season, offering entertainment ranging from light comedies to more serious dramatic works. These performances provided evening entertainment alternatives to private parties and allowed Newport society to demonstrate its cultural sophistication by attending theater. Polo represented another important sporting and social activity in Newport. The sport had been introduced to America in 1876, with Newport playing a central role in its early development. The Westchester Polo Club was founded in Newport, making it the first polo club in the United States. Matches were held at various locations around Newport, with spectators gathering to watch the fast-paced and exciting competitions. The appeal of polo extended beyond the sport itself. Polo required significant investment in horses, equipment, and training, making it accessible only to the wealthy. Attending polo matches became a social event, an opportunity to see and be seen while watching skilled riders compete. The matches typically took place on Saturday afternoons, and the crowds that gathered included much of Newport society, all dressed in their finest outdoor attire. Yachting culture in Newport deserved its own category of social activity. The New York Yacht Club maintained a station in Newport, and many of the wealthiest families owned substantial yachts. These vessels were not merely boats. They were floating palaces, equipped with luxurious accommodations and requiring professional crews to operate. Yacht races became major social events, with families sailing out to watch the competitions and often hosting parties aboard their own vessels. The America's Cup yacht races, when held in Newport waters, represented the pinnacle of yachting culture. These international competitions brought together the finest yachts and most skilled sailors, competing for a trophy that had become symbolic of yachting supremacy. The Vanderbilts participated in yachting culture, though they were not as obsessed with it as some families like the Astors, whose yachts were legendary. Carriage parades, as mentioned earlier, represented daily social rituals that extended beyond any single household. The afternoon drive along Bellevue Avenue and Ocean Drive brought together much of Newport society in a mobile display of wealth and fashion. The route became crowded with elegant carriages during peak season, creating a spectacle that both participants and observers enjoyed. This was society performing for itself, demonstrating its own magnificence in a very public way. Every 3 years, Newport hosted a particularly elaborate carriage event known as Coaching Weekend. This celebration of horse-drawn transportation featured competitions, parades, and demonstrations of driving skill. Families would bring out their finest carriages, most impressive horses, and most skilled coachmen to participate. The event attracted spectators from across the region and represented Newport at its most ostentatious. The Cliff Walk, that public path running behind many of the great estates, created a unique space where different social classes could observe one another. Wealthy families might stroll along the walk, enjoying ocean views and fresh air. At the same time, ordinary citizens had access to the same path and could observe the mansions from their ocean sides. This proximity between classes was unusual for the Gilded Age and contributed to Newport's distinctive character. At a spot along the Cliff Walk known as the 40 Steps, a different kind of social gathering took place. This location, at the end of Narragansett Avenue, became a meeting place for servants, particularly Irish domestic workers who formed a large percentage of the serving class in Newport. On their rare hours off, servants would gather at the 40 Steps to socialize, dance, and enjoy themselves away from the watchful eyes of their employers. This created a parallel social world, one that existed alongside but separate from the world of the families the servants worked for. Newport's religious institutions also played roles in social life, though these roles were somewhat different from those in other communities. Families like the Vanderbilts attended church services at appropriate establishments, with Trinity Church and other fashionable congregations serving the summer residents. Church attendance was part of maintaining respectability, demonstrating moral probity, and participating in community life. However, the religious aspect was often secondary to the social one. Charity work represented another area where Newport society engaged with the broader community. Women particularly were expected to involve themselves in charitable activities, supporting causes deemed appropriate for ladies of their class. Alva Vanderbilt's later work for women's suffrage represented one form this could take, though her political activism was more controversial than the more traditional charity work most women pursued. The transformation that the summer residents brought to Newport extended to the local economy. Shops along Bellevue Avenue and in the commercial district catered specifically to the wealthy seasonal residents. Dressmakers, jewelers, florists, caterers, and various other merchants depended on summer business for their livelihoods. The relationship between the wealthy families and local merchants was complex, combining economic dependence with social distance. Restaurants and hotels in Newport also served the summer colony, though in different ways than they might in other resort communities. The very wealthy typically entertained at home rather than dining out, but there were occasions when restaurants were used. Smaller parties, lunch engagements, or entertaining when one's own house was unavailable. The Viking Hotel and other establishments became known for their ability to serve the demanding tastes of the summer residents. Newport's beaches were managed differently in the Gilded Age than they are today. Bailey's Beach in particular became the exclusive preserve of the summer colony. Membership was strictly controlled, access limited to those deemed socially acceptable. The beach provided a venue for swimming, sunbathing within the modest standards of the time, and social interaction in a more casual setting than the formal calling hours or dinner parties. The broader social life of Newport created a context within which individual families like the Vanderbilts operated. The various venues, activities, and institutions provided the infrastructure for social interaction. They created opportunities for families to display their wealth and taste, to compete with one another, and to reinforce the boundaries that separated them from those not of their class. Newport was not just a collection of private mansions. It was an entire social ecosystem, carefully constructed and constantly maintained. The season's arc, June through September. The Newport social season followed a predictable arc, beginning with the arrival of the first families in late May or early June and concluding with departures in September. This seasonal pattern organized the entire rhythm of life in the resort and created distinct phases within the summer months. The opening of a cottage for the season required substantial preparation. Servants typically traveled to Newport several days before the family, arriving to find houses that had been closed since the previous September. Windows needed to be opened, dust covers removed from furniture, linens brought out of storage, and every room thoroughly cleaned. This opening process could take a week or more, depending on the size of the house and the number of servants available. The Vanderbilts maintained skeleton staffs at their Newport properties year-round to provide basic maintenance and security. However, the full complement of servants needed for summer operation traveled from New York with the family or were hired locally for the season. Coordinating the arrival of all these staff members, ensuring that everyone knew their duties, and getting the household running smoothly required significant organizational skill from the housekeeper and butler. When the family finally arrived, typically in early June, they found the house ready for occupation, looking as if it had been continuously lived in rather than closed for 8 months. The invisible labor that made this possible was precisely that, invisible. The family simply moved into a house that was clean, comfortable, and ready to support their summer routine. Early June in Newport was relatively quiet compared to the peak season weeks of July and August. Many families had not yet arrived, and those who had were settling in rather than immediately launching into intensive social activity. This early period allowed time for renewing friendships from previous summers, for making initial calls on neighbors, and for generally easing into the seasonal routine. As June progressed into July, the pace of social activity accelerated. More families arrived, filling the mansions along Bellevue Avenue. The various social institutions began their full operations. Tennis tournaments started at the casino. Yacht races were scheduled. Polo matches brought out spectators. The daily carriage parade along Bellevue Avenue became a regular feature. Newport society was in full swing. July and early August represented the peak of the season. During these weeks, every day brought multiple social obligations. Calling hours were fully attended, with ladies making and receiving visits on designated days. Dinner parties occurred nearly every evening, with families either hosting or attending. Balls and large receptions took place on weekends, sometimes with several happening on the same night, and families having to choose which to attend. The social calendar during peak season was published informally but widely understood. Everyone knew which families were hosting which events and when. This allowed for coordination and also for competition. Families vied to host the most impressive ball, the most elegant dinner, the most talked-about entertainment. The Vanderbilts, with the Breakers as their venue, were major players in this social competition. Special events punctuated the season. The annual tennis tournaments at the casino attracted national attention. Major yacht races brought additional visitors to Newport. Coaching weekend, held every third year, created a spectacle that drew crowds from beyond the usual summer colony. These special events added variety to the social round and provided additional opportunities for display and competition. For the Vanderbilt children, the summer season had different meanings depending on their ages. Younger children enjoyed the freedom of summer, the opportunity to play outdoors, to swim in the ocean under careful supervision, and to generally live less structured lives than they did during the academic year in New York. Older children and teenagers participated increasingly in the social activities of the season, learning the skills and behaviors they would need as adults. The debutante system, through which young women were formally introduced to society, typically operated during the Newport season. Balls held specifically for this purpose launched young women into adult social life. The families hosting these balls spared no expense, creating events that would be remembered and talked about for years. Gertrude Vanderbilt's 1895 debut at the Breakers set a standard that other families struggled to match. As August progressed toward September, thoughts began to turn toward the season's end. Families started planning their departures, coordinating dates with the schedules of servants and the closing of houses. Some families left earlier than others, particularly those with school-age children who needed to return to cities in time for the academic year. By early September, the exodus was well underway. The closing of a house for the season reversed the opening process. Furniture was covered with dust sheets to protect it during the months when the house would stand empty. Linens were washed, dried, and stored carefully. Windows were closed and locked. Valuables were either taken back to New York or secured in the house. The full staff departed, leaving only the year-round skeleton crew to maintain the property until the following summer. For many servants, the seasonal nature of Newport employment meant that they traveled between different positions throughout the year. Some servants stayed with the families they served, traveling to New York when the season ended and continuing to work in the family's primary residence. Others were hired specifically for the Newport season and had to find different employment for the rest of the year. This created a mobile servant class that followed seasonal employment from one location to another. The end of the Newport season did not mean an end to social activity for families like the Vanderbilts. They returned to New York, where the fall and winter social season would begin. Newport had been the summer culmination, but the social round continued year-round, just in different locations and with somewhat different expectations. The arc of the season, from the quiet opening in June through the intense activity of July and August to the gradual dispersal in September, created a rhythm that organized upper-class life. This rhythm was predictable, allowing families to plan their summers with confidence. It was shared across the entire summer colony, creating a common experience that reinforced social bonds, and it was exclusive, marking those who participated as members of a select group. The seasonal nature of Newport also had significant impacts on the local community. The influx of wealthy families and their servants created a summer economy that supported many year-round residents. Shops, restaurants, and service providers depended on summer business. Workers in various trades found employment related to the needs of the summer colony. When the season ended, the local economy contracted significantly, only to expand again the following summer. Conclusion: the legacy of organized luxury. The daily life that the Vanderbilts and their peers organized in Newport during the Gilded Age represented something more complex than mere luxury. It was a system, carefully constructed and constantly maintained, that required enormous resources and continuous effort. The 70 rooms of the breakers, the 33 indoor servants, the elaborate social calendar, all these elements combined to create a lifestyle that was both impressive and fundamentally unsustainable. Cornelius Vanderbilt II died in 1899, just 4 years after the breakers was completed. Alice lived for another 35 years, maintaining the breakers and its role in Newport social life. The costs of this maintenance were substantial, with property taxes reaching staggering sums. The Gilded Age lifestyle that the Vanderbilts exemplified began to change even before World War I. The introduction of federal income tax in 1913 significantly reduced the fortunes available for such lavish spending. The war itself disrupted international society and questioned the assumptions of pre-war life. The cultural changes of the 1920s created new attitudes toward wealth, display, and appropriate behavior. By the time the Great Depression arrived in 1929, the world that had sustained Newport's summer colony had largely disappeared. The breakers itself survived these changes, though its role transformed. Alice's youngest daughter, Gladys, inherited the property and in 1948 began leasing it to the Preservation Society of Newport County for $1 per year. The family continued to occupy a third-floor apartment during summers while tourists toured the lower floors. This arrangement continued until 1972, when the Preservation Society purchased the property outright, though Gladys's daughter Sylvia Sapari retained life tenancy of the apartment until the 1990s. Today, the Breakers stands as one of Newport's most visited tourist attractions. Over 1 million people tour the mansion each year, walking through rooms where the Vanderbilts once lived, entertained, and enacted their particular vision of the good life. The house has been carefully preserved with much of its original furniture and decoration intact. Audio tours based on personal diaries, letters, and oral histories help visitors understand what life was like for both family and servants. The other Newport mansions tell similar stories of construction, use, and eventual preservation. Marble House, the Elms, Rosecliff, and others all became museums, their grand rooms now experienced by visitors from around the world rather than by the exclusive few who once gathered there. These houses serve as monuments to a particular historical moment, preserving in stone and wood and precious metals an approach to life that has vanished. The daily routines that organized Vanderbilt life in Newport were products of their time, shaped by available technology, social expectations, economic resources, and cultural values that differ significantly from our own. The multiple changes of dress, the elaborate dinners, the constant round of social obligations, all made sense within the context of Gilded Age society. They served purposes that their practitioners understood, even if those purposes seem strange or unnecessary from our modern perspective. Understanding how the Vanderbilts organized their daily lives in Newport provides insight into broader questions about wealth, class, and social organization. It reveals the human labor required to maintain luxury and the complex interactions between different social classes in a resort community. The legacy of this organized luxury extends beyond the preserved mansions. It shaped Newport itself, creating an architectural and cultural heritage that continues to define the city. It influenced American attitudes toward wealth and display. It created stories that have been told and retold, becoming part of American mythology about the past. Whether we view this lifestyle as admirable or excessive, it remains a significant part of American history. The Vanderbilts' Newport shows us what became possible when enormous wealth combined with particular social ambitions. The mansions they built, the routines they followed, and the social world they created together tell us something important about America's Gilded Age. As we walk through the breakers today, as we look at the opulent rooms and imagine the dinners and balls that once filled them with life, we can appreciate both the beauty that was created and the costs that beauty demanded. We can marvel at the craftsmanship while questioning the system that made it possible. We can enjoy the preservation while recognizing that what is preserved is not just architecture but evidence of a particular way of organizing daily life, a way that shaped American society and culture in ways that persist even now, more than a century after the Gilded Age ended. If you found this journey through Newport's Gilded Age interesting, please consider liking and subscribing to History Between Years. Your support helps us continue creating these deep explorations of historical moments and the people who shaped them.